Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we have yet again Benjamin B. to my left, or possibly your right. Benjamin?
What's happening, everybody?
How are you today?
No complaints.
Did you save any lives today?
I don't know what's going on in the world, but there's a lot of bad fentanyl going around right now, and a lot of people passing away, and it seems like been doing more interventions the last couple of weeks where it's like literally life and death. It's been a little crazy.
That's the unfortunate part about what we do. Although we do, obviously we're in the business of saving lives and restoring relationships with families, so on and so forth. The unfortunate truth is that people do pass away, and we hear about it before generally anybody does. We've had a couple people pass away over the past, month that have been pretty near and dear to us, and, we've gotten to know very well. So it's unfortunate, but it's kind of comes with the territory at this point.
No, it definitely does.
So in today's episode, what we want to discuss is really a few points about, Ben, why don't you... I like the way that you put it, so why don't you take us into this episode?
Inadvertently, we were just kind of talking about all these quote-unquote interventions we've been doing, and a lot of this has been life and death. And one of the things that I've seen a pattern happening lately is that folks that are in active addiction, or say they've had, because a couple of these cases had significant sobriety time, and went back out, rather than asking for help, the pattern that I've seen is they're trying to save their face. The saying is you can't save your face and your ass at the same time. For all appearances, they're trying to keep it up, whether they don't want to lose their job, they don't want their family and friends to find out, they don't want their supports to find out. And I've seen a lot of this going on lately. It's just... Maybe back in the day when primarily we were dealing with alcohol, if you went back out, you might have had some time, things gradually start falling apart, and then you could get some help. Nowadays, with the carfentanil out there, people are using, and within the first week of using, they're dead. A few of these cases was within the first 24 hours, and they're dead. And so, point is, you can't save your face and save your ass at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, to kind of elaborate on that just for a minute, at least from my perspective, what I think happens a lot of times is it's the pride, it's the shame, it's the ego, all these things kind of get in the way of what's ultimately most important, because like you were saying, it is, it even references in the big book, if you're not bought into this kind of lifestyle, go ahead and go out and try some controlled drinking. And on a surface level, to an alcoholic, that is very possible to do, unless, they're at the point of liver failure, stuff like that. To go out and do some controlled drinking is probably not realistic. But one thing that is for certain, you cannot go out and do controlled fentanyl use. You can't go out and do controlled cocaine use or benzodiazepine like Xanax and stuff like that, because what we're finding now is that everything, drugs, and we were just talking about this, drugs that you would never even think has fentanyl in it. Like they're cutting cocaine with fentanyl. They're making, pressed Xanax pills with fentanyl in it. I know one person in particular that thought they were taking a Xanax and ended up overdosing, and there was fentanyl in the pill. Now, fortunately, that person didn't pass away, and they knew there was fentanyl in this. And the way that they found that out was through blood tests and stuff like that. And they're like, well, I thought I was taking a Xanax. And it turns out they were taking fentanyl.
And case in point, I just can't wrap my head around this. A couple months ago, maybe? I think it was in Fort Lauderdale. There was 4 or 5 National Guard members. I could have a little bit of the details wrong here, but 4 or 5 National Guard members that came down to Florida, bought some cocaine, and a few of them, all of them ended up overdosing, except for one of them or something along those lines. And, you know, it just, I can't wrap my head around it. Like, why would you put fentanyl in cocaine? It doesn't make sense. And cocaine is done in larger quantities. At some point, you know, I don't know about anybody else, but I didn't do just a little cocaine. When I sat down, I did it. It would generally went on for sometimes up to 2-3 days, 4 days straight, hardly sleeping. Like, at some point, if that's cut with fentanyl, you're going to do more than you intended to do. And it wasn't even in my intention, is it wouldn't even be in there. You know, if I was buying fentanyl or heroin, I'd want it separate. I just don't get it.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense and never will. But let's move on. So kind of to transition into what we're talking about here, one of the last things to go when somebody is nearing the point of going into treatment, they've gotten to the point of, you know, they're no longer in the pre-contemplation stage. They're no longer in the contemplation stage. They've now moved in through, you know, they've bought into the idea that they have an issue. It's very apparent. Everybody around them knows that they have an issue and they want to take action. The last thing to generally have to go is their job. And I reference myself in this. It wasn't until I got let go from my job that I had to seek treatment. And the point in that is because through our job is generally how we get income and, you know, financially be able to pay for our addictions. So you can understand why when Ben says you can't save your ass and your face at the same time, it's been our experience that most people, one of the biggest barriers of them entering into the treatment process is, well, am I going to lose my job? And that's rightfully so. It is a big fear, and it should be, but most people don't know that they're protected. You know, us being drug addicts and alcoholics, there are stipulations, there are guidelines and guardrails put around to protect us from getting let go from our jobs. And most people don't know that. It's a resource that's available to us. And because, you know, they, for whatever reason, they don't know that it is available and that they are protected, will prevent them from entering in.
The reason I wanted to cover this too, you know, I always put on that I like to use real life examples. Over the weekend, it was Sunday in particular, I'd gotten a call from a gentleman, and we work in the industry. You know, we've been in recovery a long time. We know these things are available, but I got on the phone with this guy he told me he was drinking a gallon of vodka every 2 days and severe alcohol withdrawal, worked for a large corporation. And one of his number one concern, I don't want to lose my job. And I want to put this on video and on the podcast to let people know that this stuff is available. For instance, there is a federal law, Americans with Disabilities Act, that drug addicts, alcoholics fall under. If you go to your employer and you say, I need to get help for my alcoholism or my drug addiction, they cannot fire you. You're protected, point blank. Now, you get this opportunity to go to treatment. There's also, you can take it further. For instance, our place, Rock, other facilities out there, we have case managers. There's also other benefits as well. You could do family medical leave of absence, also known as FMLA, short-term disability. We do a lot of this stuff because one of the things is people are concerned about their finances. Maybe they're the breadwinner at home, so to speak. You know, there are ways to navigate that, and a lot of these corporations, businesses have an HR department that can help you navigate this. You cannot lose your job if you go to them. Now, on the other hand, you know, let's say, for instance, and this is pretty common knowledge, you know, if I'm working a construction site, for instance, as this gentleman was, and, you know, I show up in the morning drunk and I end up causing some sort of accident, yes, I can absolutely lose my job, and rightfully I should. You know, somebody could get hurt. But if you bring it to them before something happens, before there's an event that costs you your job or, heaven forbid, cost somebody an injury or their life, like, you are protected.
Yeah, I think what it boils down to is having a proactive approach with the issue. And I oftentimes will reference myself. I was let go from my job, and they had every right to do so. I mean, I was an auto mechanic by trade. That's what I did, and I really put people's lives at stake because I was forgetting to tighten bolts on their brake calipers and stuff. People would leave their cars with me to fix, and I would butcher them. And the dealership finally said, "You're too much of a liability, Tom. We got to let you go." Now, I had ample opportunity, and I knew my situation. I knew that I definitely qualified to go into treatment. But again, I didn't really know the resources available to me, so on and so forth. And it wasn't until I was let go from my job that, okay, and I was in a fortunate position to have health insurance and, was able to pay the COBRA and all that stuff to be able to go and get the treatment that I needed. But from an employer's perspective, they can't, if they're forced to have to be reactive, then you can get let go. There's nothing preventing them from firing you if you are a liability to the company, regardless of the situation, if you're a drug addict or not. If they want to fire you, they're going to fire you. But if you go to them, had I gone to the employer and said, "Hey, listen, I have a severe drinking problem. I want to go get help for myself. In turn, I feel like I can come back and be a much better employee," they don't have a choice. You kind of force their hand at that point. Now there are, I want to make sure to clarify, we're not attorneys. We're not like anything of the sorts. It's just been our experience with working with other people. So, if you were to go and say, "Hey, I have a drug problem and I need to get help," and they do fire you, don't blame us. I mean, but you can seek legal advice and stuff like that, just to clarify.
I want to throw it out there too, from my perspective and my story. I'm on the opposite end of the spectrum, but still the same principles apply. I was always a bartender and personal trainer. Well, guess what? There's restaurants and gyms everywhere. I didn't really, the job thing wasn't much of a barrier for me because I knew, like, hey, if I'm a bartender here, I can go to treatment. I can get another bartending job tomorrow. They're always looking for people in the service industry. And sometimes I hear that stuff, people tell me, and there's nothing against working in the service industry. I did it for 10 years, but those jobs are, to be straight up, a dime a dozen. You can make a good living waiting tables. And me having that mindset, like, sometimes we'll get clients potential clients that'll call us on the phone. They're like, "Oh, I don't want to lose my job at Applebee's." I'm like, "Really? You can get a job across the street at Duffy's when you're done." Like, those jobs, you can walk in and pretty much just get a job with your experience like that. You're not really so invested into one place. I mean, that's just my perspective and my opinion. Maybe some people feel differently, but if you have a case like mine, also don't let it be an obstacle as well.
Good point. All right, let's move on to the next one. The next one that we want to discuss is, a lot of times people say, "Well, I don't want my family to really know what's going on." And this one kind of blows my mind. But it's easy for me to say that now because I'm sober and I know. But we're generally always the last ones to know that there's an issue. And it's kind of an unwritten rule that by the time you get to the point of knowing that there is an issue, everybody else knows. For the vast majority, I would say, if you have 100 people that have an addiction problem, 95 of them, everybody in their immediate family and stuff like that knows as well.
Oh, without a doubt. We're always the last ones to be aware. Bill W.'s story in the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous talks about that. There's a line in there that says, "Our friends thought a lunacy commission should be appointed." At the end of the day, we are the last ones to know. Everybody else is seeing it. We're just naive to it. And for myself, I would almost say as well, like, it's not so much I wasn't aware that they were aware, but more or less, I thought things were manageable, and everybody else could see the unmanageability in my life, the excuses I would always make, the lies, etc. And they're beginning to see things are falling apart or already fell apart. And in my head, being in that insanity, like, I think I have it together enough. And The fact of the matter is, had I listened to them ahead of time and got help when people were pointing it out to me, it may have made the process a little bit easier. Now, at the end of the day, you can't deny somebody their experience. We hear a lot of the times, like, you can't deny somebody their rock bottom because it's a solid foundation, right? But at the same time, like, you know, if somebody's smart enough to listen to the concerns of somebody else and really hear it, it might make the process a little bit easier. You might not have to suffer as bad a consequences as what are definitely coming down the line.
Well, again, what this boils down to is transparency and trying to be honest and open-minded and willing to acknowledge that there is a problem. In our families, 9 times out of 10, when our families know and understand the severity of what's going on, unless it's a totally dysfunctional family for whatever reason, they're supportive and they would want to know. You know, if I had an issue with something, my family, I know wholeheartedly, would want me to get better because they love me and they want what's best for me. But for whatever reason, it's a barrier for people when it comes time to get help. They just have this idea in their head that if my family finds out, I'm done. And it's really the opposite. When your family already knows, but once you're willing to be okay with the fact that they know and you buy into the idea that they know and I need to get help, that's the beginning of a completely new life for you. And that's just the reality of it. What's the next one, Ben?
The next one, one of the quote unquote excuses that I hear a lot of times is, oh, I don't want to leave my family in a bind, right? I can't tell you how often that's a concern that we're able to overcome. You know, it takes a lot of going back and forth. Oh, I'm the breadwinner for my family. That I don't know how they'll do it without me there. The funny thing is, generally speaking, the client arrives, and we do family therapy here as well. We have a family weekend where we get the families involved. So, you know, phone calls occur, so we get the other side of the story as well. You find out so many times once a client is with us through their family, they're like, thank God they're gone. Everything is so much peaceful, so much more manageable, and so much easier without them around. They think that they are there helping with the kids, helping with the bills, when the reality of the situation is, when you hear from those family members the amount of chaos that they were causing, it actually got easier for them when they went to treatment. And they almost, in some terms, don't want them to come back for a significant period of time. You know, are there situations where families feel differently? Yes, without his paycheck, I don't know how we'll get by, etc. But again, that goes back to what we were talking about earlier. You know, there are options out there, the short-term disability, things along those lines for people that qualify. It's worth looking into those resources. Have a professional make you aware of what might be available to you. Find out from your HR department. But point is so many times they're grateful that you're gone and out of the picture. They get a break from you.
I like to reference a lot of times, and I haven't done this in a long time, but I'll reference to families that the addict themselves, it's kind of like being in a hurricane, and it's being here in South Florida. It's, you know, hurricanes here are just something that you have to be prepared for. To be honest, I'm petrified of having to go through hurricanes, but it's just a part of being down here. When a hurricane is coming and we first understand, or like, okay, the meteorologist comes out and says, hey, there's a Category 2 hurricane bearing down on South Florida. It's not like, you know, all at once, boom, you get hit with this hurricane. There's a process in this. And oftentimes with hurricanes, I'm sure you've heard there's outer bands. And when these outer bands, you know, it starts, whether it's coming, you know, from the south or the east or whatever, these outer bands hit you first. And these outer bands can look like a bunch of different things. You know, the addict, they wreck their car. It's an outer band. And then that outer band kind of passes through and things are calm, you know. And then the next outer band comes and they rob you of your finest jewelry. Well, that's a stronger that's a stronger outer band. But that one passes through. And then there's some calm, and you're like, oh, maybe this isn't going to be as bad as what I thought it was going to be. And then boom, out of nowhere, the eye of the storm. Here we go. Now the addict overdoses in your basement. Who knows what happens? Hopefully they don't pass away. Or they get into a car accident and they, severely injure or kill somebody else. Who knows? But this is now the eye of the storm. This is like, okay, this is the storm that I am in. There's no amount of money. There is nothing that a family member would do when they're in that much stress and that much anguish to want to keep you around. There just really isn't.
That was a really good analogy, Tom. I don't think I've ever heard you share that one.
No,
use that one in groups. Use that in groups.
Yeah, I have before. But it's true. Like when I'm in a hurricane or I know a hurricane's coming, I would do anything. I mean, I've gotten in my car with me and my family and drove 1,500 miles away to get away from it because I don't want to be there. I understand the ramifications that are coming with this hurricane, and that's just like with an addict. They would do anything to remove you from the situation. So this whole idea of I'm going to put my family in a financial strain or situation, they don't want you around anyway because you're the eye of the storm. You are a huge problem right now, and until you can go and get help, they don't want you there. I mean, point blank, period. That's the best analogy I can think of.
Definition of insanity, the inability to see the truth. And most alcoholics and addicts can't see the amount of chaos that they're causing when they're there.
So another one that we hear a lot of times is it kind of falls under legal ramifications, court cases and stuff like that. Again, I'm going to reference myself. I got my DUI, blew a .33. They took me straight to the hospital, and I went into treatment. Well, when it came time for me to kind of face the music, I was here in Florida. All of my charges were in Pennsylvania. They knew full well where I was, and I knew full well that I had a bench warrant out for me, but we were in communication, and I knew that there was a possibility that I could get picked up at any moment. But listen, it was for a DUI and stuff. I was willing to run that risk. Point being is when I went back to Pennsylvania to face the music, I had 10 months of sobriety under my belt. And I sat in front of the judge, stood in front of the judge, and I was facing felony DUI charges because of my blood alcohol level and the other drugs that they had found in my system. But I stood in front of the judge and I said, listen, and I didn't have an attorney, by the way, where I had a public pretender, also known as a public defender, but he didn't care. I stood in front of the judge and I was honest with him or her. And I said, I'm doing the right thing. I got 10 months of sobriety. I have all the documentation, all the drug screens. I'm managing this sober living environment, so on and so forth. And the district attorney was there wanting to really just throw the screws at me. And the judge said, I would be doing you a disservice by forcing you to stay here and go through the processes here. And literally, I was on a plane 3 hours later flying back to Florida. Now, I had to surrender my license for a period of time. I did have to pay some fines and stuff like that. But the point is that it was proactive. I had a proactive approach rather than reactive. So when we are talking to clients and stuff and they get into these binds with legal situations and stuff, I always tell them, look, you're in a much better position. You want to tell the courts what you did to be proactive about your situation. You don't want to be in a position to where the courts have to tell you what to do. Because if the court's imposing this on you, you're not bought into it in the court's eyes. But if you go to the court system and you tell them, look, I know I screwed up. This is what I've done to, to rehabilitate myself, so on and so forth. They look very favoring on that.
What Tom just described, we see all the time. And I also want to be very logical in the fact, going back to the court's eyes and society's eyes as well. Let's say, for instance, I have a court date coming up for drug possession charge, fentanyl. I have a fentanyl possession charge, and I have a court date out that's a month and a half from now. If I'm still using fentanyl, question is, am I going to be alive to even make it to that court hearing? You know, I might as well get on a plane or go to treatment, you know, whatever that looks like, and get that help. Because if I don't stay alive, it doesn't matter. The other thing is, let's say it's alcohol, for instance. Let's say I got a DUI, and I'm an alcoholic. Therefore, regardless of the consequences, I haven't stopped drinking, even though I got... Did you get more than one DUI? No. Yeah, I got one. But I know people who have like 4 or 5. I met one guy in treatment once, had 9, right? And but the thing is if those consequences haven't stopped them drinking, they're still drinking. You know, it's better that they go to treatment in society in the court's eyes than continue to drink and drive around illegally, probably without a license, you know, and then potentially kill somebody or something along those lines, you know. And just to kind of touch on the process a little bit more specifically, again, Tom mentioned being in touch with the courts. You know, we have a case manager at Rock, and all of the facilities have this as well, case managers, but we go back and forth with probation officers, parole officers, attorneys. I've actually done a Zoom with a client for a court hearing with the judge, you know, and just let him know, here's what he's doing, this is what's expected of him. And in so many cases, you know, they want the drug test results. Are they being breathalyzed every day? How long have they been sober for? Are they completing their treatment plans? And so many times they get a continuance, and they're basically just like, hey, you've done well this month. I tell you what, we'll give you another month in treatment. And we just kept keep checking in, and over the course of time, like Tom was saying, a lot of times the judge is like, I'd be doing you a disservice to bring you back. You know, why bring somebody back into the chaos? Are there situations where people have to go back and serve jail time and stuff along those lines? Yes. But at that point, you know, it's still more manageable. I've seen jail sentences drastically reduced. I've seen prison sentences drastically reduced. You know, it's again, being proactive, like Tom was saying, is of uber importance. And let me touch on this one last part. This kind of goes back to the more legal side of it, just to kind of understand. Substance abuse facilities are technically medical facilities, just like a hospital. We have a medical doctor here that's employed with us. And say, for instance, somebody has a court hearing coming up, and let's say they, you know, fall down some stairs and break their arm and their leg and get a concussion, and they need to be in the hospital the day of their court date. They're in a hospital bed in the ER. What's the court going to do? Oh, you were in the ER. You didn't make your court date. No. If you are in a medical facility, the court technically cannot come take you out. There is an exception to the rule, and I learned this once. This was several years ago. If the U.S. Marshals are involved, that's a different story. But you have to be like, the guy that this was involved with was trafficking tractor trailers full of firearms and heroin from Mexico, stuff along those lines. So the U.S. Marshals were like, basically, I was told to get out the way. But at the end of the day, we're a medical facility. They're not going to come pull you out of here. Legally, they can't, because you're getting medical help.
It's a good point there, Ben. Again, though, we are not attorneys. So don't say Ben and Tom said that this is okay if, for whatever reason, FBI shows up to pull you out of treatment somewhere. Because we don't know your situation, and we are not lawyers, and we are also not doctors. So don't take any of this stuff as medical advice.
Ditto.
Yeah. The last thing I think that we should touch on, and for the sake of time, we'll just do this real quick. The overall kind of theme behind this is fear. When it comes to somebody needing to seek treatment, what they will do is they will find every opportunity or every reason in the book as to why they cannot or should not go into treatment. Now, on a surface level, they're all excuses, but these excuses are 100% rooted in fear. So, from a loved one's perspective, what can you do to help kind of ease those fears? Love and support. help them understand that the decision that they are making is a very fruitful decision. It's not something that you're going to look down on them for making this decision. Their jobs are not going to look down on them for making this decision. Everybody that is seeking treatment is scared shitless that the whole world is going to collapse around them. And it's to be expected. Again, most addicts feel like they have it all together and they can use successfully. Most of them do. And in reality, it's the exact opposite. So, all of these things that we just discussed is rooted in fear. And we need to do our best, not only as facilities, but as loved ones and people trying to help them get into treatment, to understand, look, you're doing the right thing. We're going to be here to love you, support you throughout the whole process.
Well said.
All right. Thank you for watching this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in if you are on the podcast form. If you like our content, if you like what we have to share, leave us a comment, give us some suggestions on some topics that you would want to discuss, and we would love to, talk about them on the show. You can email us, Tom, that's myself, at realrecoverytalk.com. Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And again, our primary purpose is to not let your sobriety get stale, and we want to help you turn your mess into your message. See you later.